President.
The senator from Kentucky.
Reserving the right to object, designating Russia as a state sponsor of terrorism is a colossally bad idea, a dangerous provocation, and a roundabout way of allowing military strikes on Russian targets. If you doubt this, ask the Venezuelans. All of the kinetic strikes on Venezuelan boats are justified because they are designated as a terrorist sponsor. They have these fancy names. We call them designated terrorist organization, and therefore it's like a war, not quite a war, but they justify their attacks, and they justify acting like there is a war with Venezuela by designating them as terrorists. Never underestimate Washington's ability to make things worse. In its insistence that Moscow be a permanent enemy of the U.S., the foreign policy establishment is pushing to impose more punitive measures on Russia, measures that may make globalists in Washington feel virtuous, but in reality will do nothing to help Ukraine, do nothing to bring peace in Europe, and do nothing to make Americans safer or more prosperous. In fact, if there's one thing more likely to disrupt the peace talks and make it less likely to find peace, it's simply labeling Russia as a terrorist nation. If you want to destroy the peace process, you should pass this legislation and shout it from the rooftops that you're calling Russia a terrorist nation if you want to disrupt the peace talks. This bill would designate Russia as a state sponsor of terrorism, directly undermines President Trump's diplomatic efforts to end the 4-year war in Ukraine. If you like the war in Ukraine, vote for this bill, because this bill will do everything possible to drive Russia away from the table. Our goal should be to seek de-escalation and stability in Europe, which will only come about by establishing working relations with Russians. None of this says that Russia isn't the aggressor. None of this says that Russia isn't doing bad things. They're in the middle of a war. Yes, they are the aggressor. But simply standing forth and showing how virtuous we are by calling them terrorists will do nothing to end the war and may well allow the war to continue. The hardliners in Moscow already believe they're at war with the U.S., and designating them as a state sponsor of terrorism will only throw further fuel on that fire. This misguided legislation would destroy any semblance of U.S.-Russia bilateral relations, and it's not going to achieve its desired intention. It's absurd to think that applying more economic pressure on Russia will get them to change their objectives. They've fought for 4 years. They've lost tens of thousands of soldiers. They've killed tens of thousands of soldiers. Some say up to 1 million casualties in this war. We already imposed 16,000 sanctions on them. Do we really think that 16,001 is going to do the trick? We think, oh, we're going to call them a terrorist. What a terrible thing. They are going to lay down their arms and give back the land they have taken. No, that's not what's going to happen. This will not work, but it might drive them away from the process of coming to a negotiated settlement. If this bill is enacted, Russia will likely conclude that negotiations are futile, and they will continue the grinding war of attrition on the battlefield. And it should come as no surprise, given the disparity between Russia and Ukraine in terms of economic strength and population, that a war of attrition does not favor Kiev. President Trump has repeatedly made clear that this is not our war, and that his primary desire is to end the killing. He's 100% right. Congress should fully support the president's efforts to end the needless slaughter of a generation of young people in Ukraine and Russia. But this legislation will do the opposite of his intentions. This legislation will put peace farther away, may well drive a wedge in negotiations and end the negotiations. The way to do this, the way to achieve peace, is to pursue realistic negotiations. Negotiations that, whether you like it or not, will require that Russia's security interests are taken into consideration, not by ratcheting up tensions with Moscow or by designating them as a state sponsor of terrorism. The Washington establishment already succeeded in its foolish designation of drug cartels in the Western Hemisphere as terrorist organizations, and now we're conducting extrajudicial killings of individuals seemingly every day with no congressional authorization or oversight. What's next? Are we going to commit extrajudicial executions of Russians? Once they're designated as state sponsors of terrorism, that's exactly what we're doing in Venezuela. They say, oh, we're just not killing any drug dealers. We're killing drug dealers who are terrorists. That sort of begs the question, when they released a narco-terrorist who'd been in prison for 45 years, the former president of Honduras, Hernandez, oh, well, why is he not a narco-terrorist? Oh, because we name who the narco-terrorist is. The guys we're killing in the boats, they're narco-terrorists. The guy convicted and sent to prison for 45 years, the former president of Honduras, he's not a narco-terrorist. But the justification for killing the people in the boats who are not armed, there's been no evidence presented that anybody in these boats is armed. We're killing unarmed people because we call them narco-terrorists, and now we're going to call the Russians terrorists. What does that mean? Are we setting up the predicate for bombing Russian boats? They say they don't need authority for war. They say they can do it, but you're helping them by designating Russian as terrorists. And when you do, and when they begin to blow up Russian boats, what will we say? The Washington establishment has succeeded in this foolish designation. We now have drug cartels. We're conducting these killings. What's next? Will we allow killings of Russians? Will we allow bombings of Russian boats? Designating countries or cartels as terrorists essentially has become an end run around congressional war-making powers. The Constitution says we declare war. They say, well, it's not quite war. It's somewhere in between war, but it's not drug smuggling anymore. We don't kill drug smugglers on sight, but we do kill them if they are designated terrorists. So it's just game playing with these labels. It's circular reasoning, but everything about it leads to more war and leads to less restraint. Once they are designated as terrorists, attacks on the country are argued to be sanctioned. This is an argument for saying that bombing Russian boats will be sanctioned. The terrorists, the Venezuelans, are said to be terrorists. Their boats are targets, and we can bomb them like it's a war, but not a war because we haven't voted on it. If we label Russia as terrorists, is that the same conclusion? So while we are not at war with Russia, designating them as a state sponsor of terrorism implies that no further vote of Congress is necessary before letting the bombs fly. To think that the risk of escalation must no longer concern us because the war has gone on for years is folly. There is still danger to escalating the war with Russia. We must still take great care to ensure that the United States is not foolishly dragged into a kinetic conflict through stupidity or miscalculation. Americans supported President Trump because they resonated with his message of America first. Outside of the globalist elites in Washington, everyday Americans do not want to be further entangled in a war 5,000 miles from our shores. Congress should reject this bill and instead focus its efforts to advance realistic peace negotiations in Ukraine and pursue policies that advance America's national interests. I object.